Though I know I should be wary, still I venture someplace scary. Ghostly haunting, I turn loose. Beetlejuice! Beetlejuice! Beetlejuice!
Hey guys, what's going on? Memes here. My apologies for the delay. It's completely my fault. Maya was completely on time and I was completely late like usual. But we are joined today with special guest Maya Morena. Say hi to the folks, Maya.
Hi.
Okay, and how we got here was actually you happened to be on the APAG Zoom call and you had brought up some concerns about how different folks, whether they happen to be within the greater DACA community and especially within the adult entertainment industry, just kind of a bad rap. So would you mind sharing with the folks just kind of like your story and just kind of like how you just kind of came to these United States and just a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, I came here when I was 5 years old. I was smuggled here. It was after Hurricane Mitch. And so, yeah, I mean, I was allowed to stay because my parents lived here. I was very lucky. And then I was able to get DACA once I graduated high school. So this was in like 2012. So I was very fortunate for that. It allows you to work legally for 2 years. And Trump has been trying to get rid of it. So that's been a whole thing. But yeah, I mean, once I entered the porn industry, I kind of realized that I'm not the only one. It's just that they don't really come out of the closet, so to speak. So a lot of your porn stars are undocumented, even the white ones. Especially the white ones. And it was pretty shocking to know that I wasn't like, oh, I'm gonna go there and I'm gonna be the undocumented porn star and it'll be a whole thing. I realized that for people in the industry, it was not like a shocking thing at all. So I thought that was really interesting. We don't really get a lot of representation at all. And that creates a problem because people who like are against the sex industry, they kind of view undocumented people as trafficking victims, which is not really a good thing. The way our law works, like we're basically criminalized anyway. Like, it's kind of the same thing as being undocumented. Undocumented immigrants are associated with trafficking, but they're just kind of universally criminalized anyway. So it doesn't really grant you more rights just to be placed in that category automatically. It's kind of like trying to separate people into like the deserving poor versus the non-deserving poor. And America has made it so that there's like a small amount of people who deserve any help, and then for most people just don't deserve anything. So I think we have to kind of like move past the labels and start to see more of the diversity among people, instead of like letting people at the top kind of create these weird categories.
There's always a label, and it bothers me to no end, where it's just like, well, you're this, and this is all we think about you, rather than, oh, you're a human being that happens to have certain characteristics about you as well. And you had even been saying before we kind of went live here, just there are a lot of surprising things within the industry. You were talking about, what was it, those girls that were saying it's like, well, don't think about boys, don't like hold hands or something like that. Could you kind of let the folks know?
That was a Girl Defined on YouTube. But that was kind of more of like a larger kind of movement that is against the sex industry that's been growing in a lot of churches. A lot of churches have been creating this weird conspiracy and going to war against the sex industry because they call it a war against trafficking or a war against, like Satan or whatever. So the church and like various churches, not all of them, and the government officials and NGOs are kind of starting this war against sex workers. Like they're all kind of just uniting. And so they're creating like little conspiracies. They're becoming more right wing, I guess is the way to describe it. So it's become a lot more extreme. And I think every once in a while people are exposed to it. And Girl Defined is an example of that. They're very extreme. So they'll kind of advocate for like, don't think about boys, don't masturbate. I didn't even like kiss my husband until I married him. Just very like as conservative as you can possibly go. Um, it's become pretty extreme, and obviously like the general public for the most part mocks this, but I don't think they understand how deep it goes. Like those girls have, I've seen them in books that I read about trafficking, and how all the sex industry is actually trafficking from actual preachers. And the woman behind Girl Defined signed off on the book saying, oh, it's great, and politicians read these books and they also co-sign it. It's like they're all like in this weird thing together, and the public largely isn't really paying attention to it, or just hasn't been exposed to that.
Well, the interesting thing about that, and again, we are on YouTube right now, so just leave these folks alone. We don't condone any type of harassment or anything like that. But at the same time, it seems surprising about some of the folks that were kind of almost getting along with this kind of like anti-sex movement there. Like you had said, there were certain celebrities that you were mentioning that seemed quite surprising that they happen to be kind of like anti-sex.
Yeah, they're
Hold on, I'll keep going while you're chewing. But
Mhm.
like you had said something about like Russell Brand, and that was extremely surprising to me. I believe a Miss Amy Schumer or something as well. And I'm
Mhm.
like, that struck me as incredibly surprising, because I thought those would be two individuals that happen to have large platforms. A lot of folks happen to know about them. And I figured they would be all for people just kind of exploring their sexuality, as well as maybe just being open to just a different diversity of just employment and just the future and everything. So
No, a lot of liberals are also part of the movement. But it's interesting because I would say it depends on which political arena you're in. They're both friends.
mm, right.
But the way they see the world is very different. So conservatives obviously adhere to like a more traditional, I wouldn't say conservative, traditional kind of value people, I guess. I don't
Right,
know.
right.
But they adhere to more like the two-parent household, don't have sex until marriage, that kind of stuff. Whereas when you go to like the more, I guess, progressive liberal people, um, they also have traditional values. It's just that they're just against sex work. They're against sex being commodified. That's the way they see it. So they only believe that you should have sex for love, because you love the person, and you should be in a two-pair bond relationship, right? And that's when you have sex. So it's a little bit more, I guess, liberal, but they're really like, you can't just have sex, just like have sex. That's like wrong. So that's kind of, it depends how liberal they want to be, but for the most part, they have like pretty traditional values. So sex work for them would be completely wrong. A lot of them are worried about all the girls who have casual sex. They think that's wrong too. Some of them equate that with trafficking as well. Um, yeah, I mean, I don't really know what else to say to that, but yeah. So if you like pay attention to like Russell Brand, he does like segments about masturbation and porn, and he thinks it's very spiritual to like not have sex or masturbate and stuff. Or
Better out than in, I always say.
yeah. Um, yeah, I haven't watched Russell Brand in a while, but he's just become very weird, which is kind of funny because apparently he stopped doing drugs, but I just feel like now he's even weirder than before. I feel like he's just like in space now.
It's because I had watched him a fair bit over. I too had kind of stopped watching him probably over the past 6 to 8 months or so. But I remember before he'd have like a lot of folks on for I believe his show Under the Skin. He would have some in-depth interviews with folks, and he has become quite spiritual and everything as well. But it did seem kind of surprising to me. I mean, I wonder almost if he's viewing it as penance for quote unquote past sins or something like that.
Yeah.
Again,
Apparently, I don't remember the exact story, but a sex worker said that he saw a sex worker and he broke her phone because she wouldn't do what he wanted her to do. I'm not remembering the story correctly. I'm not sure if I'm remembering the story correctly, but it was like an incident that happened and was reported on. So it is kind of like weird that now he's like preaching about like, oh, no, sex work bad, don't watch porn, da 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 da. And I'm like, he's just very annoying now. But there's been this trend in Hollywood where they're becoming like more spiritual and kind of, I don't like it. I think it's very weird. It just kind of reminds me of that woman, like Gwyneth Paltrow. She's also really involved in the anti-sex work movement because, of course, she is. But I remember this like TV show. It was a talk show. A bunch of white women were gathered around and they were talking about porn and how it was bad. And I swear to God, they always have this conversation about our vaginas and how like, well, you know, they're only so pretty because like they're not real, because like they all like make so much money and they pay to have their vaginas, you know, look as nice as they do. And so they'll like sit around in a circle and like make fun of that. And it's like, yeah, most of us don't actually do that. Like most of us don't actually have enough money to get our pussies done. But it's like so weird because it reveals that they're so insecure about their own pussies that they're like, oh, these women, they all have fake pussies. That's the only way they look like that. Yeah, ha 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 ha. It's just very weird because it's like these women are all very beautiful. They're all like the stereotypical blonde, you know. Yeah. So they're all sitting around, you know, they're all like really skinny white women and they all have like rich lives. They have rich lifestyles and they're so insecure. And I'm like, what is like wrong with these people? Because I see this continually where they're so insecure and they project that onto us. And they kind of categorize us as like different women, you know, these women are different from us.
Now, Maya, we all know nobody would ever project, especially on the internet.
Oh God, it's terrible. I feel like with sex work, it's like the worst. Let's see, what else do they project? I feel like it's the pussy thing, and then it's also the anal thing. And this happened to me with Alexi Myers, actually, because I protested against her. And Alexi Myers is the wife of Seth Meyers. He's also very anti-sex work. So Alexi Myers is a prosecutor. She used to work for the Brooklyn DA's office, district attorney. Now she works for Sanctuary for Families. But yeah, very anti-sex work. And when I criticized her because she, you know, works for Sanctuary for Families and she supports the human trafficking intervention courts, which basically causes women to be arrested and you go to court and you have to pay a fine. It led to the death of Layleen Polanco, and she was also in the news. So I criticized her for supporting that and for supporting the equality model, which is the Nordic model. It criminalizes sex work. And she basically watched my porn rather than responding to me. So a reporter asked her about me and she's like, oh, I don't need to speak to her. Like, I don't need to answer anything. But that girl, you know, I watched her get anally raped. She did not look empowered. That was it. That was like her response. And so it's weird that they just kind of will look you up and in their minds just be like, well, I don't need to respect this person. So they'll basically slut shame you. They don't really feel like they need to respond to a slut. And that's kind of their thing. It is interesting that like out of everything that she could have found on me, she decided to focus on the anal thing. So the guy that I had anal sex with was my bisexual friend. And he was at the time married. He was about to be a lawyer and he stopped because being a lawyer took too much of his time, and his husband was disabled. So he decided to enter sex work to take care of him. So that was my partner. And she told this reporter that she watched me get anally raped.
While you were having consensual sex with a
Yeah.
friend or what?
You know what I mean? So she's like assuming that all the men in the industry are evil, that they're all like just straight evil patriarchal men who rape people. Right. But it also
I think it
like
was Laszlo
reveals,
talk.
it also reveals that like they're just not into anal sex in the bedroom. Like every time they kind of speak out against sex workers in this way, they reveal what they don't like in the bedroom, or like what they're insecure about. Because they always talk to me like that. They're like, "Oh, you think getting choked and spit at and called a slut is empowering?" Like obviously they're not into that, and that's fine. They're just like against kinky sex.
No, consent matters.
Yeah, like the arguments like that kind of just reveal what their own issue is, or like what they're not into, which is fine. So for me, it's like the main arguments they have is usually about we have fake pussies, we have fake orgasms, or the anal thing, which, yeah. It's very interesting though, because they create these separations that aren't real. So one of the things they'll say is that, well, sex work is not like regular sex or like the way other women have sex, because sex workers fake their orgasms. And I'm like, it's not, it's not a sex worker thing. That's a woman thing.
I mean, no woman has ever faked an orgasm before.
Yeah, and so when I bring that up, they'll usually just kind of lie and be like, "No, well, I never faked one. No woman I know fakes one." Like they try to create like such a insane separation that it requires them to basically lie. Yeah, other talking points are pretty much follow that line.
For some reason in my mind, I'm thinking about that congressman back in the day that was very against the LGBT community and happened to get caught in a bathroom kind of playing a little footsie with somebody in there, and it ended up coming out that that gentleman happened to also be gay as well. And it seems that some folks just kind of start harping on certain things that maybe they're not necessarily comfortable with speaking themselves. Maybe it's deep down or hidden. And again, I don't know this. Every individual is different here as well. But it just kind of seems like, just in my opinion, you're almost kind of getting a double whammy. It's just like, oh, look at that girl. Oh, she happens to be within the sex work industry. And I mean, she also happens to be, well, she was obviously trafficked here as a child or something. So they're kind of coming at you from like two additional angles there.
Yeah.
But, I mean, that don't really seem fair to me.
Mm-hmm.
But so it looks like that all things going ahead as planned, we will have a new president coming in. So it looks like DACA will stand. Do you have any particular hopes for that, or any future legislation, or what are your generalized thoughts?
I would really like to just have rights. I've been here since I was 5, so it's been like over 20 years now. And I would really like to have citizenship sometime in my lifetime. It's hard. Like I would like to go to college, and I started my first semester, but yeah, I can't get any federal loans, or like most scholarships I can't qualify for, so it makes it like really hard. Yeah, that's what I'm hoping for.
All right. No, hey, let's hope that we do see some positive changes as far as that goes. I did also see, before I popped on the APEC Discord, that
Oh my
apparently
God, there's comments. I just saw them.
yes, there are.
I'm
See,
so
the thing is,
sorry.
here's a little chat here, so it kind of feeds in from YouTube. So, and quick shout out to Joe Franco, one of my patrons. Joe Franco and Dave M. This broadcast is helped made possible by viewers like you, as well as Bone, Wookie, as well as we had Laszlo there, Parrothead, Zacharot. thank you all for joining us again. We are speaking with a Miss Maya Morena. She does actually have an article, which should be linked down in the doobly-doo below. If not, I'll have to toss it in after this. But it did look like Twitter was potentially going to start changing some of basically what may be allowed, because one of the things is on Twitter, you can be naked. This is the thing. People can post porn on Twitter, whereas Instagram, you cannot. You can be kind of spicy, but you can't do this. So there does seem to be concern within the adult entertainment industry that this may kind of roll back on business. Or did you have any particular thoughts on that, or what's your general 411?
I have no idea what's going on with Twitter. I'm just hoping it doesn't become like Tumblr. Instagram just sucks, but it's to be expected since it's owned by Facebook. I mean, I feel like a lot of the corporations have also become a very anti-sex work, and yeah, a lot of it is the anti-trafficking policy. I swear to God. This is also why a lot of businesses are becoming cashless. Yeah, it's the same justification. If you look up like cashless and like trafficking, like that, you'll start to see that that's actually one of the justifications is that by going cashless, it'll be trafficking free. But the reality is that these policies actually just target poor people. Poor people can no longer just go in and get anything because they need a debit card or a credit card. So poor people are effectively kicked out of all businesses. That means homeless people. That means people who just don't have debit cards or credit cards. It also means undocumented immigrants and people who are part of the informal economy will no longer be able to use these companies that are going cashless. So
that's I can understand.
It's great because they don't really like poor people anyway. But it's unfortunate because then the rest of us are kind of just left with nothing. Yeah, cashless is discriminatory, but it's, again, I feel like a lot of people, it's great that they point out that cashless is hurting marginalized people, but I think it's also good to understand why these companies are doing it, because they have very bullshit justifications for it. And if we can kind of destroy why they're arguing for it, I think it would be more helpful.
My opinion is it just comes down to money. If you don't need to actually transport said cash as well, plus the fact that you can earn a small commission off of every dollar every time a card is swiped, because full disclosure, I worked for about 2 weeks within the payment processing industry, and at least back in the day, it was kind of like the old school cable companies where it's like you needed to have your terminal, you needed to have all these different equipment and everything. And okay, you could charge like $80 for a terminal, you could charge like another $80 or so for the service. But now when you have services like Square or PayPal, it's like, well, why would you charge the same type of fees when it's literally like the data that we're using right now for free on YouTube costs more than just to send a quick little thing saying, hi, I'm giving you $20. So like that's, it kind of seems a little bit of a BS, again, in my opinion over here. Yeah, it does seem that we are seeing a major shift with a lot of things in society. Some of them are good, some of them are not so good. I mean, trafficking is a problem. I know I had personally spent about 5 years up in New Hampshire, and one of the, I believe it was like a Chinese food restaurant or something like that, where I had driven by on a fairly regular basis. Apparently there were immigrants that were being trafficked there as well. So it is a problem. But what I kind of took away from you is you feel like you're kind of almost being used as like a political chip for some folks to say, oh, look at this poor girl. Go on.
Yeah, I would say trafficking for the most part as a narrative has always served the state and people in power. It doesn't really serve marginalized people. I'm just like going off history, which I can kind of briefly go over. Because if we really cared about marginalized people like undocumented immigrants, we would just kind of give them rights. you know. It's really weird that people connect trafficking with slavery, but then are like, oh, but we can't give these people rights though. Like, it's very bizarre to me. It's like, we don't have working rights, we don't have voting rights, and all these people advocating for trafficking are never like, hey, you know what we should do? We should give people we don't give rights to, we should like give them rights. And so like you have documentaries like Sell by Date, which is, you know, being, I think Meryl Streep is involved with it and a whole bunch of other people, Sarah Jones. But their message is basically like, oh my God, sex work might be legalized and they might have rights, the horror. So for them, anti-trafficking is not giving marginalized people rights. It's really stupid. And that's kind of the issue that I have with it, and why I kind of have to point out to people that anti-trafficking, for the most part, is used by elites to deny people rights, and it doesn't really serve marginalized groups. Because if it did, you know, anti-trafficking organizations would be advocating for, you know, reparations for slavery, the removal of Confederate flags, or to give undocumented immigrants rights, to give sex workers rights, and, you know, all these other things, but they don't actually do that.
Now, when you say it, they're kind of almost working against the grain. Could you elaborate? Like, how specifically are they kind of preventing? Because, I mean, that kind of just
I'll go
confused
over
me.
the history a little bit. Yeah, sorry, I cut you off. I do have some like books that kind of show what I'm talking about, because I collect books from like the 1800s and 1900s. But back in the day, because trafficking is old, the narrative itself. It started in the late 1800s after slavery was abolished, like the actual slavery, the transatlantic slave trade. And so trafficking, like, narratives really started to pick up and began. There was a thing called the liquor traffic. So alcohol, it was called the liquor traffic. People who sold alcohol, bartenders, were called liquor dealers, where this is where like drug dealer starts to come in. And there were narratives that people who sold alcohol were sex trafficking children. This sounds familiar, right? Yeah, this is very, very old. I actually have a website where this was a while back. I have to update it. I haven't updated it in over a year, maybe. But I have a list of books that people can read, and it's not written in Old English, surprisingly. It's like you can read this stuff and it's like someone wrote it today. So there are books about, you know, saving the young girls from the trafficking, you know, because they're going to go to the saloons and they're going to dance with boys, and they're going to have alcohol, and alcohol is going to enslave them. And before you know it, they're going to become fallen women. And then once they, you know, become whores, that gives them mental illness. They become feeble-minded, and then they die. That's kind of the way the narratives are sold. And gay people were also accused of trafficking children as well. There were narratives by doctors from like Johns Hopkins Hospital or Harvard that were like, yeah, the gays, they stand out outside of the court school, you know, the schoolyards, and they rape the little boys, and that's how the boys get STIs, and then they die. They're trafficking our children. We must protect them from this monstrosity. Yeah.
It kind of reminds me of the #1 doctor recommended cigarette back in the day.
That was also trafficking as well. Cigarettes.
Oh dear.
Some historians have called this period a moral panic. So if you look up Henry Ford, for instance, Henry Ford wrote a whole book about cigarettes. I'll have to find it, but he called it trafficking. Like, this is like the new slave master. So it's a real thing. It's hard for people to wrap their heads around it. Rockefeller was also involved in this movement. He ran like a whole court system in New York City to investigate white slavery, which was white slavery was sex trafficking. That's what they used to call it.
The
So,
Case Against the Little White Slaver. That
oh,
appears
you
to
found
be.
the book? Yeah,
I'm
Henry.
looking at. Yeah, I'm
It's
gonna put a
a book
little
about
link.
cigarettes and how cigarettes will, prevent workers from working harder, and it's like a whole bunch of other stuff. He also accused Jewish people of sex trafficking women and girls. That was another thing. That was
Well,
another book he wrote.
as a half Jewish dragon kid on this internet stuff and things, it's nobody's hated on the Jews for any number of reasons over history. I tend to think Henry Ford, and again, I have no evidence of this. I think the anti-cigarette thing may have been against kind of giving workers a cigarette break.
Yeah, I mean, maybe. I don't know.
I have no idea. I'll have to
Why
read
has
the
a
book.
big problem with slavery and trafficking? I live in Arizona. I mean, I can look up the numbers for you guys. I don't know if I'm allowed to like write in the chats.
Oh yeah, no. By all, this right here it doesn't. I can anything you want, or if you have a link, I can look it up and we can share it as well. Just because this is, hold on,
Yeah,
this
I
is
would
what I
say
found.
every state has their own history with trafficking. So I always recommend people look into it. Yeah, it's kind of very complicated to understand. Oh my God, yeah, I remember this.
This is wow. That looks like a terrifying little book there. That
Little
I
White Slaver.
oh wow. How the
Yeah,
employees.
as you can imagine, this movement was really racist, and I would argue it's still really racist to this day. Um, yeah, it used to be called white slavery. The first anti-trafficking treaty was called the UN Treaty for the Suppression of the White Slave Traffic. So stories around trafficking usually revolve around a white girl who's trafficked by some non-white dude or by a foreigner, usually some Russian dude, a Jewish guy maybe, and then she's held as a sex slave somewhere far away. And then usually like, a white guy who's part of law enforcement has to go save her. And then, they live happily ever after. That's usually how trafficking narratives were sold. And if you look up most of the movies and media around this, you'll see that it really hasn't changed like at all. It's still the same, which is like really bad.
I'm seeing a certain pattern in the stories you've shared, and again, this was in the past, but unfortunately, there are certain things from the past that do kind of still be coming up once in a while, and this is something that a lot of people do feel very strongly different ways about a lot of these very controversial topics, and that's perfectly fine. Everyone's entitled to their own opinion as well, but it's just I do think we need to kind of bring to light certain things because I do remember you were kind of talking
Yeah.
about statistics and everything before, which I remember some of the statistics that were being listed there, and it seemed like was almost everybody that maybe happened to be an immigrant that happened to be working in the adult entertainment industry was essentially considered a trafficking victim.
Yeah. Oh, okay. I think I found the numbers. So I found the numbers of human trafficking cases for 2018 from the FBI. I don't know if there's a way I can post it or I can send it.
If you put it in the private chat, I can bring it up.
Oh, cool. Okay.
So if you click over to the private chat, all right, I'll bring it up right now. And
Yeah, because a lot of people are saying, well, this state is considered, the biggest state of human trafficking. And I will say this, every state is considered like a hotbed of human trafficking. They say that for every state. These are the actual numbers from 2018 of human trafficking cases. So clearances are the cases that they actually closed.
yeah.
So I'm not like, it's hard for people to be open-minded about this stuff because there's so much propaganda about it. But most of the money that's put into human trafficking doesn't actually go toward victims at all. And they don't really find a lot of victims. And I would argue it's because trafficking, for the most part, is not focused on people who experience violence. It's focused on criminalizing people, and mostly sex workers and undocumented immigrants. So it creates, again, binaries. Like, this is a good person who deserves help, and this is the undeserving people. And for many of them, people who choose to come here legally, people who choose to be sex workers are not good people. We're like evil. which is bad because the truth of the matter is you're most likely to be like victimized. You're most likely to be forced to do work if you are already criminalized. So if you're somebody who's already a sex worker, you're already undocumented, you're usually the one that's most likely to be exploited. The idea of like an innocent victim, for the most part, is hard to find because most people just aren't innocent. You know, it's really easy to find fault with people. But it's also that you're more likely to be victimized if people can see that they can take advantage of you. If they see that, like, you know, maybe you're using drugs or selling drugs, or if you're undocumented and a sex worker, because they know you're breaking the law. So they know you're less likely to be able to go to police. You're already criminalized, you know? And that's kind of the issue of this. I would argue that you really can't help people if you already criminalize them. So the numbers are really low, as you can see.
The thing that surprises me is because I do think there was actually a federal bust in New Hampshire. I believe it was 2018. I could be mistaken, but it's saying that there's zero right there. I do find that surprising.
That's because, unfortunately, a lot of law enforcement, they sell usually prostitution bust or undocumented immigrant bust. Sometimes they'll sell it as human trafficking bust. And the media will just kind of sell it as whatever they say it is. And then they won't charge anyone with human trafficking. They'll just kind of throw them all in prison. They'll find no victims. This happens a lot. So like the Robert Kraft case, no one was charged with human trafficking. The woman went to prison though. So
that was down in Florida. That was down in Florida, and I believe that actually, and full disclosure, I am a Patriots fan. I do live in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, but I do remember that Bob Kraft and I believe several individuals happened to get busted for receiving, let's say, additional services within the massage and salon parlor they were there. But I never really remember, like you said, hearing about any charges that stuck to him. But you're saying that the woman that happened to be involved went to jail.
All of them. They had their money taken. Oh, it gets worse. So it was a prostitution sting, which means the police went in and they put cameras and they recorded these women. Again, they called them trafficking victims.
Right.
They put in cameras and they watched these women for 6 months. They recorded them. The police went in and they bought hand jobs from these women, right? Calling them trafficking victims, but this is the way they're behaving. This was in the Robert Kraft case. This is what they did. And then they also threatened to release the tapes of these women to like try to get something that they wanted in the courts. There's also like, sorry, I have ADHD, so I kind of move around.
Oh, no, I resemble that remark.
There was, I'm trying to remember what else there was.
I'm just, no, a lot of what you're saying right here is news to me, because I remember hearing, oh, Bob Kraft got busted for getting like a hand job or something. I'm like, okay, so consenting adults and everything. And now I'm finding out the women involved, their money was taken. They went to jail. And this was also after members of law enforcement happened to go in to make sure that these things were going down as well, which leads to a whole bunch of other questions I have, along with taping it for 6 months before you actually engage in your law enforcement. It's just raising even more questions.
What don't get is that, you know, they always think like, oh, you know, they're only harming the sex workers. And it's like, but this is what it looks like when this is what there's not really like a separation between the two. If this is what a prostitution sting looks like, then this is what a human trafficking sting looks like too. In other words, police are probably raping all those trafficking victims, like the real ones. Because it's not like they're asking these girls, oh, hey, how old are you? How old are you before I rape you? I just want to know, right? They're not doing that. But no one is asking these questions.
No. I mean, we would need. I'm sorry to cut you off, but we do need evidence. We don't want to paint with a wide brush, but unfortunately, it would not surprise me.
That's the thing, though, and I'm not trying to paint with a broad brush, but it's these are questions that people aren't asking. And I obviously am a sex worker, and I've done advocacy with other sex workers, and this is a very common problem, that police will use their position of authority to get sex from people. And so I know I have sex worker friends who started when they were teenagers. They are considered trafficking victims by default, and they have had encounters with police officers where they have been raped. I have a gay friend who started as a teenager and was raped by NYPD. So this is something that happens. No one reports on it though. Like no one even thinks to really ask how these operations take place. There has been a lot of news recently that has covered these sting operations and what's involved in them. But yeah, it's not really uncommon for this to happen because they're given positions of authority. And cracking down on sex is really hard because it often turns into he said, she said, right? So it's the officer's word against you. So it creates a lot of scenarios where that can be abused. But I'm sorry that if I jumped to that, but it was like,
oh no. It's I understand that. It's just regardless, whatever classification, occupation, it's just I dislike, because I kind of subscribe to the whole hashtag not all, just for the sheer fact that, again,
yeah, not all.
These things do happen. And just what you're saying right there, I mean, again, it doesn't unfortunately surprise me, because if you have an individual that happens to be in a position of power, where especially within the court systems, very often, if it comes down to even just my word or your word against an officer, typically they default to the officer. And especially if you had something horrific happen, people are less likely to come forward because they feel like, well, they don't want to be a victim, even if they were a victim. And the sheer fact that there's likely not going to be believed, and the fact that maybe they were being charged with something for maybe just literally existing in the wrong place or not having a paper or something like that, that's going to be an additional strike against them. So this is one of the reasons why I tend to support like universal badge cams. So at least if folks knew that the truth would come out, if something like this does happen, then there would be questions, or why wasn't the officer's badge cam on? So at that point, it leads, because I do think this is important, because at least at that point, if an individual knew that the truth could come out, one, it's going to prevent bad officers from engaging in bad things, and it might also put a lot of folks' minds at ease rather than, I might die in this encounter.
Yeah, I think it's I have met officers who are against this kind of policing as well. So like it's not like they're all like, yeah, this is great, we can take advantage of this. A lot of them are against it as well. But the problem is that there's nothing that they can do, because their job is to carry out the law, even if they don't agree with it. So my problem isn't really with police. It's the fact that like it's their job. You know what I mean? I've seen interviews with people who have talked to police who say that they don't obviously have sex with like, you know, sex workers when they do their job, but they'll do it outside of their job, you know, as a recreational activity, right? That because, you know, I'm on the job and then I'm off, and then, you know, I follow the rules when I'm on the job. So that's kind of like their position, which is like very interesting. But it's kind of one of those things of like, they have to follow a certain code of ethics in their job. They have to follow the law. And those laws suck, in my opinion. So yeah, what are you going to do?
It's kind of, rather than don't hate the player, hate the game.
Yeah. What else was I going to say? I don't remember. Should we move on to something else?
Sure. What? Where else would you like to go? We've been going. We're pushing onwards of about an hour here, about 45 minutes or so. Was there anything else you kind of wanted to touch on? Because I know we did have this article over here. Let me bring this up as well. Hold on, over there. All right, here we go. This is a lovely article. I think you did this two or 3 weeks ago.
Maybe.
Let me see. Well, we'll see right here. All right. That's a beautiful picture.
Yeah, they changed the colors. It was nice.
There we go. I'm all for different colors and everything. And just within this article, as you can see from the subtitle, it's like anti-trafficking campaigns paint migrant sex workers as helpless victims. But you've been out here to set the record straight.
Yay.
So
I like the Xmas thing. Nice. Yeah, I think what people should really focus on instead of criminalization, our country should focus on poverty. I mean, that's really the most coercive element of this. We should take care of the child homelessness epidemic. We should fix the foster care system. And we should give people rights, universal health care, college, stuff like that would be so helpful to people and would prevent a lot of the abuse that we're seeing. Yeah, stuff like that would be great.
Well, my big thing is, and those are things that personally I happen to generally support there, just because if you take a look at how much money we're spending on putting people into prison, whereas instead of putting them into prison, I don't know, maybe if they happen to have an addiction problem or something, maybe we get them some help. I mean, if somebody's a violent threat to society, I think most reasonable folks would say maybe this person should be incarcerated, because there are some folks out there. Go on.
But I think one of the things that, for me, for example, has prevented people from coming forward is, the fact that law enforcement criminalizes poverty a lot. And, it's not their fault, but unfortunately, it's the laws that they have to enforce. So like loitering, vagrancy, sex work, drugs, alcohol, still technically kind of criminalized. Stuff like that, it kind of prevents people from coming forward, because when you are being abused in these industries, right, if you're undocumented or you're a sex worker and you're actually like being held against your will, you are breaking the law. You know what I mean? Like, you're undocumented, you're not supposed to be working. You're in the sex industry and you're not technically supposed to be working. It's illegal work. And usually there are other illegal things involved as well. So sometimes you might be stealing stuff for the person you're working for. Sometimes there might be drugs involved that you're using or selling. And you can't really go to the police, I remember I was hanging out with some of my friends once, and we were doing weed, and one of my friends had a seizure, and we couldn't call the police, we couldn't really call for help, So one of my friends is a stripper, but she also used to work with kids who have disabilities, so she knew what to do. And so it was really amazing to watch her know what to say and know what to check for. But it was I was sitting there, I was like, man, we don't have anyone. You know what I mean? We're a bunch of sex workers and we're doing this illegal substance, and this person could have died, And it's we don't have anyone. This is what I think is a big problem. It's what do you do when you need help if you're criminalized?
What you said right there, I think, is probably the best example of why certain localities happen to be quote unquote sanctuary cities and stuff. Just right there for
not died from weed, but died from a seizure.
Right. Basically being afraid to call 911 because, well, it's we might go to jail because technically, well, we're not supposed to be here, and our friend might potentially die. But yeah. my general view is, especially in somebody like yours circumstance, where if you came over here as a kiddo, we have this thing within real estate. They call it, I actually forget what it's called. It's been a while since I took the class and everything. But basically, if you put up a fence, and that fence goes over onto your neighbor's lawn by a foot, but that's not legally where it's supposed to be. If it's there for 20 years, at that point, if your neighbor doesn't say anything, it essentially becomes part of your property. I'm like, all right, if we do that for property, why don't we have a similar thing for human beings? Because if you grew up here, if you work here, if you're part of the community, if you're not going around there doing violent acts or anything, my perspective is you're an American. Or you should at least have a way to have a path towards citizenship. Again, this is my opinion because, well, human beings are human beings. That's the thing. It's just we're all in this together. And to just kind of like be tossing somebody into this category or that category here, it just I don't know. It doesn't really seem to jive with me.
Yeah.
But wow, we're getting deep here. How about we finish with maybe a few lighter topics? What's your favorite type of pizza?
I actually like pineapple.
Oh, now we've gone into extremely controversial territory. I personally believe pineapple has a place on pizza.
Yeah. Mm. In certain places in Nevada, prostitution is legal. Yeah.
That is, and this is the thing that bothers me because depending on the location, because I remember I may have done some research on the Bunny Ranch, and it's actually, I think, right outside of Las Vegas there, where it's like, this is the location where this happens to be legal. And now my question becomes, well, if it's legal there, why is it not in other areas? Is that just one magical place, or is there not maybe the proper incentives for different folks or politicians to actually decriminalize it there? Yeah. Are they just, because so many of the issues we run into seem to be because there's all these old laws on the books. And it seems like very often we need to go to the Supreme Court to get a ruling to have rights for certain people. My question is, why do we need to go to the Supreme Court? If these rules and laws are out of date, why don't we just remove them?
Yeah.
I think that would solve a lot of problems going.
Yeah, it sucks. It really shows you that like we're ruled by a bunch of elites because most people agree that weed should be like decriminalized or legalized. Even most conservatives agree with this. But there's just like no budging right now. I mean, a little bit. I think it's starting to change, but it's taken so long, and a lot of people are still not budging. So it really shows that. Yeah, I actually worked in Nevada in one of the legal brothels. See, I've done it all.
Hey,
super hoe.
I was gonna say you're like the roaming gnome. It's like I've been everywhere, man. I've been everywhere.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, I think a lot of it comes down to politicians spend so much time fighting each other rather than solving problems. At least that's what it seems
very
like.
Respectable. It's kind of funny though, because all the politicians, because no one can be perfect, literally no one. So all politicians, for the most part, they all have some controversies. You know, maybe they cheated on their wife or something, or like the wife has some like shady background. Like so many of our politicians have that, but they still like force themselves to fit into this like Puritan white morality, like it's all pure and snow. And so that kind of controls what policies they will and will not support. And I'm just like, who are we trying to kid here? Why do we keep doing this?
Well, that's the thing, and it just based upon my experience, it's like I hear all these people saying, it's like, oh, we need to do this. Oh, everything is sunshine, rainbows, and unicorn farts and everything, and it's like
need to have good morals, and it's like you don't have good morals though.
Well, but my thing is, it's like left, right, up, down. It's like I keep on saying the same things happening to all these different things. I'm like, all right, is this a condition of politicians, or is this just a standard condition of humanity? I mean, what I wouldn't give to have just like a politician to come out there and be like, I ain't no saint. I am an individual full of sin, but I'm going to do my best dang job for you. Because I feel like a lot of these politicians, like you were saying, if somebody happens to have dirt on them or something, if they happen to get out of line, we're going to put all this stuff out there. And it seems to put individuals in positions where if they don't toe the line, all of a sudden something's going to come out. It's like you said, just be honest with people, be real with people, because I truly think we're in an age where just a little bit of honesty would go a long way.
Yeah, I definitely think people are ready to have more honest conversations about sex work. Um, but yeah, like I feel like the mainstream media and politicians, they really just kind of whitewash everything and they really confuse the public on what's happening. And so it makes people think that we're making a lot more progress than we actually are on human trafficking, and we aren't. You know, you saw those numbers. The conviction rates are so low. It's like they really don't deserve to get the insane amount of praise that they're getting when we're spending billions of dollars and the conviction rates are like 0 to 50. You know, it's like, what? Um, oh, in terms of like the comments, yeah. So in Nevada, the way the legal model works is that it's the way weed works. You know, it's only legal if you are rich enough to afford to buy a distillery or a brothel, and then you meet all the regulations for the distillery and brothel. You hire all the employees, and all those employees that you hire are the legal employees who are allowed to sell weed or sex, and you employ whoever you think is going to be profitable for your business. And that means that most people still do it illegally. So your local drug dealer or your local hooker will still probably go to prison and under a legal model. And that's what's happening in Nevada and all the places where weed is legal. So this is why they advocate for decriminalization.
So the people that happen to have money basically end up getting a license to make more money.
Yeah, and then all the people who can be employed at the distilleries or brothels. So the girls in the brothels are doing it legally and they can make money. But the people who can't, and you'll notice from the brothels that only like women can be employed. So all the gay people and other sex workers that don't maybe have paperwork to work legally like I do, will not be hired by these establishments, so they'll just have to sell it somewhere else.
Illegally and potentially going to jail for it.
Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah, no one explains this. And I think it's hard for a lot of people to explain it. A lot of people have told me, like, you do a really good job of explaining this. I'm like, thank you.
I've learned a lot right now. It's I did not know all these different things, and that's one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on, to just kind of like speak some truth, share your experience, and show that it isn't all completely debaucherous. I say this as a highly debaucherous individual myself, but it is what it is, and it kind of goes back to the point you were making about it kind of does seem more of like a poverty thing, whereas if you happen to not be of certain means, the system kind of screws you, or at least you feel so far back.
Yeah, that's why when I kind of, whenever we talk about trafficking, I always steer the conversation to like, we should talk about poverty now, because that's really what that problem is. And I think human trafficking in general does this weird thing where it treats exploitation like it's separate from everything else, right? They're like, yeah, you're exploited in your job, but the human trafficking victim is they're somewhere in this shadowy underground world and they're being held in slavery. And it's not like that. It really isn't. You know, a person who's being exploited could be right next to you and they're a human being just like you. They might be exploited in the same job as you are. You know, maybe they're in a domestically violent relationship and the person controls all the money. So it's really not like, oh, it's a separate thing from regular worker exploitation or poverty. It's really not. It's in the same vicinity. It's in, you know what I mean? If we can change that system, it's going to help all of those workers.
Right. And it's unfortunately, and again, this is just my opinion here, especially when you focus on poverty and folks that maybe don't have a lot of resources and stuff, that cuts across the political and demographic spectrum, because there's poor people of all different ancestries, backgrounds, creeds, beliefs, and everything. And if you can't start really a fight about it, well, unfortunately, a lot of politicians don't always seem to be taking up. Now, I'm sure there are plenty that do. It's just we don't hear about them on the news because the news often focuses on the most salacious, horrible things in the world.
Yeah.
And that's a tragedy, in my opinion.
Yeah, I do feel that we should make these things a little bit more boring. I feel like when we kind of sensationalize thing, for instance, the whole immigration stuff, it's been so sensationalized. And I mean, there's pros and cons, but I do think we need to have more serious conversations instead of like, apocalyptic salaciousness and kind of wrapping things up. Because it just feels really, it doesn't make people feel good. It will tire you out. It also doesn't really kind of get you to have like real conversations because you actually have to talk about boring stuff like policy.
Right.
You know what I mean? Talking about poverty is very not sexy. It's more sexy to talk about saving the trafficking victims, unfortunately. And that creates a problem because it's like, you should really care about, poor people. You shouldn't just only care when it's like the worst case scenario and it's a salacious story that almost never happens. Because the story that's usually told is that it's usually like a stranger kidnaps a little girl and then takes her to a faraway place and holds her as a sex slave. And that almost never happens because most kidnappings happen by somebody for instance, right? So most kidnappings happens because of custody battles or a kid running away to their sisters or siblings or stuff like that. And so this kind of erases how it usually happens, but also gives you like the worst case scenario. And then people kind of are left to assume that, oh, that's how it always happens. And then, distracts from
Stereotypes.
Cases. Yeah.
Right.
And the media sometimes like will twist stories that happen, that are more common, and they'll twist it to fit the narrative that will get more clicks. And that's another problem. So the public just ends up really confused.
Yeah, it's a lot easier to give a quick hot take on Twitter and call somebody a bad person or evil or something rather than having a thoughtful discussion about ways we can actually, I don't know, try to fix the system. But we've been going for a little over an hour here. Maya, did you have any closing remarks? Anything you would like to plug? Any type of site? I'm not sure if you happen to have like a Patreon and OnlyFans. You said you had a website you hadn't quite updated in a while. Anything you would like to kind of put out there for the folks?
I have an OnlyFans.
Okay. Where what would that be under? I can't actually put it on YouTube just because it's YouTube, but feel free to verbally communicate it to these good folks.
It's onlyfans.com/Maya Morena. You can also find me on Twitter at the Maya Morena.
Your Twitter is in the bio, and you can follow all the clicks there.
Okay. I do want to do YouTube and other stuff.
I'm happy to help you work with that as well. If you do set up just your little YouTube account, I'd be happy to go through how StreamYards, because this is actually a free service you can use as well. I happen to have a little bit of a pay-for version just because then I can do fancy things kind of like. But if you're okay without having dancing squirrels, it's free.
I don't know. I kind of want the dancing squirrels.
Okay, it's like $20.
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of hard for me to do these things because it's hard for me to maintain focus, but I would like to talk about everything. Look at this.
Right.
Yeah.
I was going to say you have far more, the amount of books that you have, and especially of classical books, you probably read far more books than me in my lifetime because I'm very ADD in a lot of ways, and I'm kind of more of an auditory learner. Like I like listening to people. That's why I love having conversations like this.
I love talking about all the bad people in society.
Well, you know what? Hey, we could set up a show. We'll get a few more folks and friends involved. We can discuss some more issues. So just to wrap up, ladies, gentlemen, everything in between, and whatever you may identify as. This has been Miss Maya Moreno. And again, you can find her on OnlyFans at OnlyFans/Maya Morena over here. And yeah, that's about all we got for now. Maya, say goodbye to the folks and any
Bye.
last closing words.
Bye, guys. I'm gonna
All
eat,
right.
so.
And on that, the squirrels will take us out. Peace out, everybody. Be safe.